Although there was still plenty of room in Los Angeles, American chose an established community a 3-hour train ride further up the coast.
Well, the Santa Barbara of 1912, the population was about 15,000, and it was a small town. There was no huge industry here to keep people occupied, so pretty much, probably tourism was the biggest thing we had going. The Potter Hotel at the beachfront, 500 rooms. The new Arlington Hotel, the site of our current Arlington Theater, had just opened up. People are traveling here primarily by train. Auto travel was still pretty bad. So we were sort of just on the verge of being discovered. People come out maybe to the Potter, starting to build homes in Montecito. That's the setting for the Flying A. It was pretty much virgin territory.
Santa Barbara offered far more scenic possibilities than La Mesa. The Flying A was no longer to be limited to only westerns. A shooting stage was built on the leased property of an abandoned ostrich farm. The bottom had fallen out of the ostrich plume fashion market, and the property was available for another enterprise.
And you look at the tourist brochures the Chamber of Commerce put out, and among the other things, the great hotels, the ocean, Flying A Studios is in Santa Barbara. Newspapers would carry a column called Flying A Notes, informing people what was being shot, where it was being shot. You've got all these shots out in Montecito. Flying A still photographer would go out and take nice photographs of the estate and give those to the owner. But also just think this guy's friends back east or in Europe sees these Flying A films and gets to see, well, there's my estate in the picture.
While Hutchinson made plans for a permanent studio in Santa Barbara, Dwan constructed a well-organized shooting company that was gaining national attention. The leading man of the company was J. Warren Kerrigan. He was an original member of the Western Company and had paid his dues in more than 100 one-reelers. Jack Kerrigan was very popular, winning Photoplay's popularity contest in both 1913 and 1914, beating such formidable competition as Florence Lawrence and Mary Pickford.
Motion picture work requires a certain number of natural qualifications that all people do not possess. It requires a strong physique, for believe me, there is no calling that taxes the physical endurance quite as much as the camera. You have doubtless seen hundreds of hair-raising escapades in your home picture show that you have credited to the art of the man that takes the pictures. You may have been right, but 9 times out of 10, you were wrong. It was the actor who took the chance, and that's one of the reasons why he is paid the high salary that he is.
Another Flying A star was Louise Lester. Louise was a veteran of the stage and had built up from support roles to top billing in her own right. Lester was featured in a very popular series of one-reelers known as the Calamity Anns. She not only played the lead, but also wrote many of the scenarios. More than a dozen Calamity Anns were produced. Kerrigan was occasionally featured in these stories, but the key was Louise Lester. By 1913, the Flying A was turning out one-reelers every 3rd day. Here's a sample. A one-reeler meant 1,000 feet of film, and during the silent era, that took about 14 minutes on the screen. That's Pauline Bush, Alan Dwan's wife. The heavy is Jack Richardson. By 1913, he had been bested by Kerrigan over 100 times. This time, Pauline gets him. Although today we see most silent films only in black and white, the prints were usually colored. Tinting and toning of the image could be elaborate. At the very least, color cues would be given to help the audience understand things like time of day. Looks bad for Kerrigan now, but things will work out. They always did. Back in Chicago, the company headquarters was aggressively marketing the Flying A productions. To keep up with demand, Dwan formed a second shooting unit.
Kerrigan got a hold of the management and said he'd quit if I didn't get rid of the second unit. And I told them what they could do about that. It was my company, and to hell with the management.
Carl Laemmle's Universal was American's biggest competitor.
Laemmle was the king of the independents. And he says, is there anybody in your company that you've had in your company you would like to have come with you now to our company? And I took the whole damn punch. I even offered Hutchinson a price. The poor guy nearly died. I think he went to the hospital.
Well, that's the way Alan Dwan saw it. He did leave the American in 1913, but Hutchinson still had a company, and it was growing. The industry, if it could really be called that, was expanding, and experienced directors stepped in to fill Dwan's void. Even more shooting units were started up, and other types of scenarios were being tried. But the Little Ostrich Farm studio was far too small. Most of the films relied on location work. Santa Barbara provided a wealth of backdrops for exterior work, but interiors were a problem and limited the ways that the stories could be told. American needed a new and larger facility. Property was purchased and plans were announced to build a modern studio. Although corporate headquarters remained in Chicago, the Flying A studio had finally found a permanent home.
The Morning Press, November 28, 1912. The American Film Company intends to make its Santa Barbara plant a model and the finest of its kind in the country, and is not worrying much about the cost. Mr. Hutchinson has not limited the expense of the improvement. That is the way film manufacturing companies do business these days.
The glass stage allowed the sunlight in but kept the elements out. Sunlight had the intensity but also limited the workday. Now, that was just fine with most of the cast and crew, but the pace of the entire industry was quickening. Kerrigan was now teamed with Vivian Rich. Vivian would become a star for Flying A and remain with the studio for many years. But Kerrigan began to hear the sirens call of Los Angeles and would leave for Universal, ironically to rejoin Alan Dwan. American kept cranking out the product. New directors and actors were hired. The company kept adding staff. For every celebrated face the public would recognize, there were hundreds more behind the scenes. Roy Overbaugh was one of the first. He had started with the Western Company and was now the head cameraman at the new studio. One of the best of the silent era, he could also spot talent in others, even the locals who came looking for a job.
One of the best known, of course, the story of Victor Fleming, who got the Academy Award for Gone with the Wind, was the director for Wizard of Oz, and there's 3 stories of how he gets into pictures. Alan Dwan claims he had a problem with his car, so Marshall Nealon said, I know this guy who can fix anything. They go out to Montecito Estate and meet this young kid who says, oh yeah, one of your tablets is broken. Dwan notices he's got photographic equipment and says, you like photographs? Yeah, I do. Well, we need a cameraman, come to the studio. And so Dwan nurtures Victor Fleming into becoming a cameraman, then a director. Roy Overbaugh says that, well, there's this kid always hanging around wanting to do stuff, and so I gave him a break, and that's how Victor Fleming got into the motion pictures. But my friend Leontine Bierabent, who was a piano teacher who was dating Roy Overbaugh, she remembers that Charlotte Burton was dating Victor Fleming. They double dated together. Probably each one of them saw it in their own way.
Leontine also landed a job with the studio as an editor.
Oh, I just had the best time up there, you know. It wasn't hard work because I got used to editing right away. At that time I was teaching music and I had some pupils and I was bored to death with them. And so, so I thought, well, I'll give it a try anyway. So I went up to the studio and I learned how to edit film. I learned how to patch the film and I'd get it all ready to go. We'd run it through the projector, you know, and then ship it to Chicago for printing.
The studio didn't install a printer until 1916. Before that, all of the films were edited directly from the camera negative.
After they put the printing in there, I remember that I used to time the different scenes for printing. They went by numbers. If it was an interior, it would be different from an exterior, you know. And I remember having to do that. I often wonder how in the world did I ever learn how to do that?
In the studio's early years, the atmosphere was casual, and the major product was still the 1- and 2-reeler. But Flying A's popularity kept rising. The Chicago staff was poised to handle the public demand. By then, 2 major distributors had emerged to get the films from the producers to the public: Universal and the Mutual Film Corporation. Mutual and Universal squared off to fight for control of the motion picture world. But 1914 brings war in Europe. The European producers lose momentum. The U.S. producers take advantage. There was enough demand to keep both Universal and Mutual very busy. The president of Mutual was John Rudolph Freuler. He also happened to be the secretary-treasurer of the American. Not surprisingly, American was Mutual's top supplier. The Chicago plant was a modern, state-of-the-art facility. Freuler called on the Flying A to pick up production. Hutchinson was only too glad to open the valve, but felt uneasy about the new trend toward feature-length films. Loss of popular star Kerrigan was balanced by the addition of Art Acord to handle the westerns. Harold Lockwood and May Allison were set to do the more contemporary stories, and the energetic Margarita Fisher was also brought to Santa Barbara. Production values had increased dramatically from the early days in Chicago, and the company was very profitable. All of this did not go unnoticed by the local community.